we're very happy to have with us today Terry McIntyre. And he's very formal in his bow tie and everything. Wow, it's great. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to give a little background on Terry. He was first introduced to other cultural and religious traditions in his Peace Corps days in Andhra Pradesh, India, in the Peace Corps, many moons ago. He taught at Papua University in Chiang Mai, Thailand, in the late 80s and early 90s. And that convinced him to go to seminary. He served in 3 parishes on the northwest side of Chicago, then chaplaincy and long-term care and 2 hospice positions. Taught college courses on Middle Eastern civilization, Asian philosophy, and religions of the world. So we have a real expert among us, and we're happy to have him speaking to us about religions of the world. I'll give a quick prayer. Dear God, thank you for our ability to worship and the freedom that we have, and thank you for the promise we have that this isn't it. This pandemic is not it. We are looking for something. We are looking for the New Jerusalem, and you promised it to us, and we know that your promises are real. Thank you for the covenant. Bless Terry as he speaks, and help us to broaden our understanding of you through this. Name we pray. Amen. Okay, Professor, take it away.
And I want to remind folks, because we don't usually record this, that we are recording this session.
I promise to behave.
Famous last words.
Yeah. I want to say welcome to the race. And I called it a race because we have 6 important religious traditions to look at. Today is going to be, we'll answer a lot of your questions about how we're going to do this, and allow me to, I hope, set a tone. And we have 4 sessions to do this around the holiday season. Wow. What a challenge. So in the link that was provided, I gave you a peek through Amazon at a book entitled How to Be a Perfect Stranger, The Essential Religious Etiquette Handbook. And I had this on reserve for every time I taught the course, because one of the assignments that I gave was for students to worship at a place outside of their faith tradition. And I told the students, many of them objected, saying, well, I feel nervous about doing that. And I said, well, so do I every time I go, and I do it a lot. But it's the best way to learn, and it's not the same as reading or looking at pictures or watching a video. So I have extensive experience with that exercise that's really lifelong. And if you didn't read that link in the handout, don't worry about it, because I'm going to throw out a few points now and give you a little time to think, and then see if you have any responses. And I'm going to make notes, because what you say will help me shape our future sessions. And I'll talk a little bit about those later on. But here are 3 things that I'd like to hear about from you, and 2 housekeeping things. Number 1, if you want to say something, just wave. Otherwise, we'll have people talking over each other, and make sure you're not muted. And then secondly, I want you to remember that we have resources, our own experiences with individuals and groups, and what we read and hear, and what we know, and most importantly, sharing how we feel about that beyond academic thinking. So 3 points that I'd like to hear about from as many people as possible who want to speak. First of all, any interaction that you've had with another religious tradition. Secondly, any reasons for your doing that, or any special interests that you have now. And then lastly, any important questions you might have. I probably already have them in mind. And if I make a list, I'll make sure that I get to them all. So any interactions you've had, any reasons for your interests then and now, and any important questions. So I'll give you a minute to think, and if there are no responses, that's okay too, and I'll go ahead. But I encourage you to give a wave and speak up. Terry, did you wave?
Yeah. Probably one of the interactions I've had is a friend of mine's mother died, and he was Jewish, and the tradition for the Jews is to have a shiva. And I had never sat shiva, which is, I guess, the term. I'd never sat shiva before, and that was really interesting for me to be there, be part of it. And I don't know kind of what the tradition of shiva is with there. And I also just kind of, I had heard that there was something called a mitzvah within the Jewish tradition, which is like a high form of religious obedience or something like that. And like one of the highest mitzvahs you can do to God is to wash the body of someone who died, because you know that they can't repay you. So you're doing something to honor someone, which honors God, and that person, since they're dead, they can't repay you. So I've kind of heard that, but I'd never had got any confirmation of that as what a mitzvah is, or how a mitzvah works within the Jewish faith.
Okay, and that's when we get to Judaism, if you can be patient.
Okay.
But I've had experience with sitting Shiva, and I've had experience with, oddly enough, helping a wife in hospice prepare her husband for cremation after he died. It was in the middle of the night, and you know from nursing that hospice people go out, and I was very close to this couple. And there we go, connecting two very disparate religious traditions who have a similar practice. So we'll cover that when we get to Judaism. Chuck and Wanda, or Chuck and, or Chuck or?
It's probably just me. I remember when I was a kid in confirmation class, our big adventures were to things like maybe Jehovah's Witness and Seventh-day Adventists. I think we ventured real wildly into Judaism, but it is kind of interesting that I guess the things that I have questions about are in our Bible, the number of things about Jesus being prophesied and then coming to fruition. I'm wondering in some of these other religions if some of this stuff has as much depth to the story, but I guess I don't know much about that, but I'd be interested in knowing that. The other thing is I've been involved with some Jewish friends who, when they had a Seder meal, invited us, and we participated in things like that, and sitting Shiva, etc. But I don't know much about the religions beyond flavors of Christianity and Judaism.
Okay. Generally speaking, and I will do a little more digging, generally speaking, there isn't the prophesying, there isn't much in other faith traditions that prophesies telling something else or someone else who is coming in the future, if that's how I understood your question. But I will be careful and look for that. Someone else. Go ahead.
Well, I think most of my experiences, can you hear me?
Richard, you got a haircut.
Yes.
I didn't recognize.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You must have had one too.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about my experiences with other religions are usually centered about funerals, as was just said a moment ago. And one in particular that stands out was an Islamic funeral that I attended for a very dear family friend that we had known for many years, and our children had grown up together. And he was killed in an auto accident very abruptly, very unexpectedly. We were living here in Virginia at the time, so we drove a long distance to go to the funeral, which was actually held at the Islamic Center outside Washington, D.C. And that was a situation where I just did not know what the order of events was going to be. And when we got there, the speaker was actually a transplant surgeon that I knew very well from my time at Georgetown. And he was speaking, moderating, and introducing other people and speaking in Arabic. So for about an hour or so, Stephanie and one of our daughters and I just sat there and listened respectfully. They passed out food during that presentation. And of course, it was very sad, and some presentations were in English and really told our friend. And then they had, it was a banquet afterwards that was just totally unexpected. Some of the best food that I think I've ever eaten in my life. And it was this contrast between this very sad circumstance and what we were doing to celebrate. I don't know if that's part of the tradition or just, how that fits into the culture, but that was a very striking experience for me.
Okay, I'll go to that handbook and look up more and talk to some Muslim friends to get an answer for you. And it's interesting because that parallels some Buddhist funerals that I participated in where, well, I'll explain that when we get to Buddhism, but the same transition from something very serious and acknowledging grieving and allowing expression of feelings to at the beginning of the cremation, everybody leaves and goes off and has a huge lunch. And it's not unlike the social part of a Christian funeral where we gather and what do we do when we sit down for a meal? We tell stories. And one of my fondest memories is stories that I heard about my father's childhood. He died when I was 19. And it was just wonderful to have people tell me what he was like growing up. And a lot of it was funny, stuff that I passed on to my kids and grandchildren. Other questions? Mary Ann, you're up on the screen. Do you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to download the book to my Kindle so I can read it by the fire this afternoon, and my computer keeps saying it's delivered, and it's not. So anyway.
Don't worry about that because it's good information, but I can answer many of the questions or no.
I don't have questions. I want to read the book by the fire this afternoon.
Okay.
That's my aim. That's
Good.
my goal this afternoon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other people?
Lois.
Yes, Terry, I don't have a great deal of experience. To tag on to what Richard said about the different language. In my youth, when we went to Catholic funerals, the masses were all in Latin and had no idea what was going on. So that was a very different experience, especially when I was young and didn't totally unfamiliar. What I wanted to just say, and I don't even know if it's pertinent, but I felt a great sadness when I was in China and Japan, and we visited the temples, and people wrote their prayer requests on little slips of paper and stuck, excuse me, stuck it in little cracks. And I thought, how sad is that to not know God, to not have God in your life? I also saw that with the weddings, because the weddings were typically held in hotels, and sometimes great masses of weddings in the hotels. So it, not to have what we have for comfort, and I guess we're all comforted by our traditions, but it was sad to me that they didn't have the same level of they didn't have God in their lives. They didn't have Jesus in their lives. That's what was very sad to me.
Okay. I'll come back to that point because it's something that I think is important for all of us to discuss. And I'm glad that you said they have their traditions, because the writing prayers on slips of paper is what Jews do at the Wailing Wall.
They do.
And other than a movement called Jews for Jesus, which most Jews are not interested in, it's a very small movement, they don't. They have Yahweh, God. And Japanese people have the beliefs of Shintoism, and Chinese people largely have the beliefs of Confucianism and Taoism. Scholars argue that Confucius is philosophy more than religion. I'm inclined to agree, and it's very good life philosophy. And Taoism is a smaller religion, which is full of philosophy and also has some core beliefs, but without a God as such, but with the Tao, depending on which Chinese system you use for pronunciation, is an understanding of the way of life. And when I hear that, I think of Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So, I want to make connections where I can, and I'll do that. But I also want to not, I want to remain very clear whenever I am with someone of another faith tradition or when I'm teaching that I am Christian, and that's where I'm grounded. Sometimes students, and I know what they meant, they would say, what kind of Christian are you? And what do you think they meant? What did they mean? Somebody answer for me. If an 18 to 21-year-old student said to me, what kind of Christian are you, Mr. McIntyre? What would my answer be?
What denomination?
Yeah, denomination. Well, I was baptized as an adult in the Lutheran Church. I was ordained in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. But where have I been worshiping for, let's see, 7, 13, 16, 19, 20 years of my life in Presbyterian churches, either because there wasn't a Lutheran church around within reasonable distance with good preaching and good music, or just circumstance. So knowing what they meant, I would mess with them a little bit, and I would say, well, I'm a pretty lousy Christian because I studied this and I know the teachings of the Bible. And if it was appropriate, I didn't often tell them, but I would say, I'm an ordained pastor, so I studied this a lot more than most people, and I really should be a much, much better Christian, but I'm a lousy one. And they say, no, are you Baptist or are you Catholic? I say, oh, that, yes. Well, I'm sort of a mixture. Okay, I'm going to take a couple
Steve
more.
wanted to say something.
Hey, Professor McIntyre, thank you for doing this, first of all. Second of all, I think you've asked for questions that some of us might be looking forward to seeing answers or hearing answers. And I want to know, in these world religions, are there invasions of God into humanity? And secondly, are there instances of miraculous experiences, like we've got miracles in the Bible? That's it.
Okay. I think I understand your question about invasions of God into humanity, and I'll do that one second. In terms of miracles, yes, but not as many as we have in our sacred texts. Muhammad, the prophet, and Muslims say peace be upon him, went off into a cave to meditate because the current religions in the Middle East in 700 CE just didn't work for him. And does anyone know who came to Muhammad before he became the prophet? In Arabic, it's Jibrail.
I mean, Gabriel?
Gabriel.
Mhm.
Yeah. So again,
Oh,
I would teach this to young students. I would say, so I guess Gabriel, as far as we know from everything that is recorded, was waiting around after his first announcement about Jesus for 700 years to go to the prophet Muhammad in a cave. And he said to Muhammad, speak. And the answer was, speak what? What do I say? But the literal words are, speak what? And he gave him the words of the Quran in a series of visions, and Muhammad memorized them, and then it got passed on orally, and then it finally got written down. So that's a miracle for people who follow Islam. And I'll look for other instances. Yes, Nancy.
Speaking of Islam, myself and several people from our church are part of a Christian Muslim dialogue group for the last 3 years. And we haven't participated in any worship service except with a different, with Dan McNerney's group. I attended a service that is during Ramadan at the end of the day. Before they break their fast, they have a service, and then they invite other people, and they explained it all to us. Can I remember any of it? No. But it was very interesting to participate. They were very warm, and the feast, of course, was huge. But the dialogue we've been having for about 3 years, and it is a dialogue without debate. So we all are very authentically Christian or Muslim and explain what we believe. We compare the Bible and the Quran. We discuss all of our beliefs, but we don't debate them. So it's a meeting for understanding and developing friendships and relationships, and not for trying to convince anyone one way or another. We leave that to the Holy Spirit. The other thing I wanted to say about Jews is there are also congregations of Messianic Jews, which who worship a lot of the Jewish traditions, but they believe Jesus has come. And I was in one of those churches once, and the worship was fairly similar to Christian worship, but they have when I went to Israel, I went with a Messianic Jew as the tour leader. So he brought huge amount of history and Jewish tradition with it.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to do a little follow-up on some things that you raised. I'm going to take one more question because I'm checking the time here and it's 11:41, and I want to do some set the stage for when we dive into our first tradition. And I'm going to make sure I have time to do that. Yes, one more question.
Sally, I have a daughter-in-law who was adopted into Mormon family.
Mhm.
And I know there are many conservative Christians that say Mormons are not Christian. And I just didn't know if you were going to, she isn't a practicing Mormon, but I'm still interested in seeing if you're going to discuss Latter-day Saints or the Mormons at all.
I will when we get to Christianity.
Okay.
And it's the scholarship is just to piggyback on what Nancy said, just totally divided about whether or not the Latter-day Saints are a part of Christianity.
Right.
And I'll explain when we get to Christianity about how that religion developed when Joseph Smith fled
Right.
the Northeast and kept moving west and was killed in Nauvoo, Illinois, on
Right.
the Mississippi River. But there were miracles, according to the Book of Mormon, that happened with his revelation to become a prophet. And some students would just poo-poo that and say, well, that's ridiculous, that's absurd. And I would sometimes have to say, well, much of any religion is absurd if you try to think logically and you only have your particular faith tradition in view. We have a distant Mormon connection through one of my daughters, and the family connection there is just full of lovely people. So I'm careful about what I say if that answers your question, but we will do some history there. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to ask if not that you mute, if you have something pressing to say, just go ahead and speak up and be careful with each other. But I want to cover some material. Okay. And I made a page of notes on what you said here, so that'll help me shape things. When you have time, go back to that link and read the pages in the book about how to be a perfect stranger. It's really valuable. And give some thought to the reality of religious pluralism in today's increasingly connected world. When I was a kid growing up, I knew Lutherans, and there weren't many of them in my neighborhood, and Catholics, and there were a lot of them in the neighborhood. There were 2 Jews, and I use that word because of a dear friend who died almost, well, it's 19 years ago. And Joe Zucker said to me, it's okay to call me a Jew. I'm a Jew. It's not an insulting word. If you say I'm Jewish, I want to say, no. Music, food, culture is Jewish, but I'm a Jew and I'm proud of it. And so I use that word not to be disparaging, but because of his advice. And he would frequently call me on a monthly basis and said, hey, when is there going to be some good music at Peace Lutheran Church? I want to know when they're going to play some Bach, or you're going to have a cantata, and I'll show up for worship. And he would come and sit in the back, and then we'd go out for lunch after coffee hour. So we have religious pluralism, and how are we to respond to the others whom we meet? Nancy, I'm very glad for what you said, that there's not debate. And dialogue etymologically means dual talking. And if you're talking all the time, not you, but if one of us is talking all the time, we can't listen to the other. And that's a pretty obvious problem if you're going to be talking about religion. The other old saying that I want to throw out is that we should not talk about religion and politics. Yes, we should. The only question is, how are we going to talk? And if any of you heard my sermon on the Sunday after Election Day, and then Paul's sermon last week, we both alluded to politics without taking sides and trying to ground our remarks in where our faith calls us. And that takes a lot of discipline if you have passionate feelings. And we all know that if you bring up religion or politics at a holiday meal, it's likely to turn into an argument or somebody's going to have some wacky opinions. But if you learn to listen and have an open mind, you don't have to change your thinking. But in my experience, and I'll tell you a little bit about a framework of the beginning and end of my experience with others, you learn something. So I grew up in an Italian neighborhood on the South Side with everybody's last name ending in A or O. My childhood friends were the Ruffalos, the DeSabatos, the DeSantos. That was the neighborhood. And the two Jews in the neighborhood were the Heimbach brothers. Their parents were immigrants who fled Europe and came to the States. And Dr. Heimbach was my childhood physician and stitched me up twice. And his brother owned the grocery store 2 blocks from where I lived. So when my mother went into a wheelchair, she would phone in an order and they would write it down, and I would take my wagon and go pick up groceries at Heimbach grocery store. And then on payday, my father would go in and they would take all of those little carbon copy receipts from a little small pocket-sized book and have them alphabetized and pull out Bob McIntyre's receipts and add them up and say, Bob, you owe us $32.14 for the month, or whatever it was in the 1950s. I was told by my Lutheran pastor that I could play with all of those Italian kids, but I better not go near St. Benedict's or St. Donatus or any of the half a dozen churches within walking distance. And some of those went back to the Civil War. So Catholicism was very heavily involved. And I have no doubt that in the 50s, the priests were saying the same thing. You can play with the 4 Lutheran kids in the neighborhood, me and Jimmy Anderson and a couple of Olsons, but don't you dare go to the Lutheran church. Well, for the better, that has changed. And in the last 10 years, I met a real cross-section of students, some of whom I still tutor and assist. And in that list are a pair of Armenian Assyrian twins, 2 Muslims from Cairo. And I did my older daughter's wedding, presided at her wedding a year ago, August 9th. And she married an immigrant from Cairo who came here at age 4 and served 6 years in the Marine Corps. Except for his appearance and his name, he's as American as you can get. And he's Muslim. And we had a very disparate gathering at that wedding. Other students are of Turkish and Iranian parentage, and I'm still helping them. And then I think not by chance, I think it was meant to happen, and I'd like to attribute it to the work of the Holy Spirit. I was looking for a particular place to eat with a friend from out of town and couldn't find it. But when I was 1 block away, I saw a bunch of monks in saffron robes outside of a former Lutheran congregation. It was sold around 2000 to a meditation center. And 12 Lutheran churches banded together. It was a plan on the part of the synod. I was part of the planning, and I did the last official Christian act in that church when some members who knew me asked if I could call the owners and get permission to perform their wedding ceremony. Well, I just was looking for a place to eat, and I'm on Gunnison it parallels Lawrence, east of Harlem, near the Jefferson Park CTA station. And I see these monks. So I tell Bill Clark to pull over, and I ran out of the car and walked up to them. I spoke Thai to them, and they were surprised. And I explained to them that I had taught in Thailand and had to learn the language. And we were just having this lovely conversation, and 4 of the younger monks weren't that good at English. So I said, would you like a tutor? And the oldest monk in perfect English said, how much do you charge? And I looked at him and I said, Taurai, which means, you know, how much money? Taurai crop, how much money, sir? And he said, yes. And this is what Thai people did to me. I pulled a scrap of paper out of my pocket. I had a jacket on and started writing, you know, let's see, 8 monks. And I'm mumbling to myself. And I went, free. So I've been tutoring these monks and lay people. Jackie has met them just outside of the building, and not in person now. And it's a group of 3 lay people and 8 monks. And that sort of frames my involvement to explain why I'm open and why I encourage other people to be open. So you already gave me some food for thought and some things to answer, but why on earth would we spend 4 Sunday mornings at this busy time of the year to explore and compare other religious traditions? And I've been wrestling with the question of how does this fit into the rubric of where is God? And I have an answer. Imagine that. The beginning words of the Hebrew Bible are Bereshith bara. In the beginning, created. And then we get one of the many Hebrew names for God. So in the beginning, what did God create? Obviously, the whole world, everything. And if any of you read Father Richard Rohr, a modern day Franciscan mystic, his reading for this morning talked about how Christ was present in God's plan for the world, and somehow in a way that we cannot grasp intellectually, was present at the beginning of creation and just continues to come to fruition. And it's the same kind of mystery that we celebrate with Advent. Christ was already born. We know that. And yet every year we go back to remembering, because Christ is going to come again. And the phrase that theological scholars use is the cosmic Christ. So my answer is, where is God in these other religions? Well, in ways that are a mystery to me, God is present, because God created everything, and God gave the people who became the originators, founders, and leaders of other religions the ability to do so. It doesn't say that in our scripture. It doesn't say that in the other sacred texts. But that's how I can fit this into where is God. I'll also add that I remember my pastor, after a service where I was commissioned as a lay missionary to go to Thailand for this teaching position at a Christian university. And at a reception after the service, because somebody from the Board of Missions came out to, it really was a lay ordination. I looked at my pastor and I said, Galen, I cannot wait to get over there and teach the Thais some of our favorite hymns. And he looked at me, paused a moment, and he said, Terry, why don't you wait and learn their hymns first? And it was a good message to me, because the very small Christian church in Thailand, which was planted by Presbyterian missionaries largely in the 19th century, because the kings of Thailand were open to other religions, already had people So what they needed was a teacher, not someone who was going to bring his particular narrow Lutheran box of Christianity and open it up and hand out gifts to them. So I went to both churches. I went to Thai church in the morning and the International Church of Bangkok of Chiang Mai met at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and had a Presbyterian pastor at the time. So we're going to do this because it's important, and we may never come up with a better answer of where God is here, but that's my answer for now. One other point, and I will put this in a handout, but I'll just tell you now so you can sort of begin to hang your thing on it. Our methodology and format is going to be to consider, if there is one, the origin and the founder or founders of each tradition, the sacred texts and the rituals, the leaders, the important people through history and their roles, the geographical and cultural location of the religion and its spread in the world, changes through time because all religions exist in history and they change. Some truths are immutable, but religions change their doctrines. Can anyone think of an example where a religion will change its teaching? If you have one, just go ahead and speak up.
Catholics eating fish on Friday. That's why my father left the church, because he said, if it was a mortal sin when I grew up, how come, what gives the Pope the authority to make it not a mortal sin now?
I love that. I love that because there's a derogatory name for Roman Catholics for eating fish. I won't say it because it's rude.
Mackerel snappers.
I didn't say that. I'm just.
I did.
For the record, I know you
Catholics.
did.
We called ourselves that.
And it changed because, and it was a very late doctrine in I want to say the late 1800s, but I'm not sure of the date, and I'm writing that down. Papal infallibility. It was not early that the Roman Catholic Church decided that the Pope was the spokesperson for the entire faith during that Pope's time on the Cathedral of St. Peter, the chair in St. Peter. But the Pope, late in Catholic history, was declared infallible. The Mormon, Tom, go ahead.
Well, you know, you talk about this, look at the conflict right now in the Catholic Church between the Pope and a lot of the conservative Catholic bishops, particularly in America. America, the magazine published by the Jesuits, which, you know, they discuss this a lot, where now the Pope is being considered by these conservative Catholics as a heretic.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to have him removed. And they're very volatile in their expression. So, for example, with Biden, American politicians who support the right to life, or any of them who are Democratic politicians, a lot of these bishops are refusing to allow the church to serve communion to them. So even in the Catholic Church, you're seeing not only something like meat on Friday, but you're seeing a lot of conflict because the Pope is advocating the role of the church is to the poor, the sick, the lame. And it's not to the wealthy, and it's not to, you know, the traditional forces represented by the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that's being a real revolution in the Catholic Church even.
Yep. I'm going to mention one more example, and then I want to talk about one other phenomenon. And I promise that we will finish at 12:10, and then I can field any questions till 12:15. The other two things, we're talking about changing through times, and those are good examples. Thank you both. Violence in religion, because there is only one religion in the world that has never committed violence. Baha'is. And they left Iran because of religious persecution. The prophet who started that religion, Baha'u'llah, was killed. And people left for other parts of the world. And there are, I'm sorry, I think 7. But I made a question mark. I'm pretty sure there are 7 Baha'i temples. And if you have not visited the Baha'i temple in Wilmette, it's worth going to for the architecture. It's a couple of 100 feet tall and has curved arches with glass in between that come to a point at the top. And on each of those arches is inscribed a central verse from a different religious tradition. The Baha'is don't have priests. So if we were a Baha'i community and this was worship online, we would all be saying, well, who's going to lead worship next week? And one of you would volunteer and you would be the leader. Very different from what we know. But all other religions, usually in the name of religion, have killed people of other faiths or dredged up rumors from centuries ago or spread rumors that have resulted in violence, except for the Baha'is. And sadly for me, there is an element of Buddhism that has taken political demonstrations and opposition into violence. Okay, and then the last thing after that, we'll look at the predictions for the future of the religions of the world. And I'll give you a few interesting statistics here. They came from the Pew Foundation, which does research into religion in society. What's the largest religious group in the world? Anybody throw a guess out?
Catholic?
Well, we're not going to talk denominations, larger faith tradition. Although I have a statistic for that, but go ahead. Anybody else?
Christian?
Christianity.
Yeah, it's Christianity in 2014, 2.3 billion Christians. And it's difficult to estimate that, but the Pew Foundation, PEW, has all of their methodology listed in appendices in these studies. And after Christianity comes Islam at 23%, then Hinduism at 15%, and Buddhism at 7%. So why are we studying Judaism? It's less than 1% of the world's population. Well, 2 reasons. One, it's where our faith came from. We're inextricably bound up. And you'll hear me refer to the Hebrew Bible or the Greek Bible, because I know we all grew up saying Old Testament and New Testament. And again, in teaching younger people, I said, which would you rather have, an old car or a new car? Well, that's a silly question. I'd like to have a new car. And for Jews, the Hebrew Bible is standalone. They may study the New Testament, they may know about Jesus, but they don't need it. They have their Bible, and that's their Bible. So that's my preference for using that terminology. But beyond it being the source for Christianity, Jesus was a Jew and knew the Jewish scriptures and preached them in the temple, and came up, he was a founder of a new religion that eventually became Christianity with an organization behind it. And why are we studying the 6, S-I-K-H? Most of us pronounce it seek, but it's sick, just like being ill, because it was a significant movement in England, in India, that was connected ultimately to political division and a tremendous amount of violence through the centuries, but really got bad from the partition of India in 1947, because the main state was divided into West Pakistan and India. And literally brothers and sisters and cousins now had a new nationality because the British sent a truck with some geographers and divided the country. And the majority of Sikhs who have emigrated are in Canada and the UK and the United States. I've had 2 Sikh physicians and some students, and they are among the most faithful and honorable people in the world in terms of their devotion to their faith and their ethics. And most of them are professionals in engineering, architecture, medicine, what other field? I think that covers it. And they're the closest Sikh Gurudwara, their name for a temple, is in Palatine. And one of their practices is to provide a meal for anyone who comes to worship. And it's home cooked. There's no obligation. You just show up, you get fed and have fellowship. And this particular Gurudwara, when they discovered the number of homeless people in the surrounding communities, just built on and set up a medical clinic that was free, staffed by many of their members and other Sikhs in the community. So it's a good tradition to study. Last thing is, and I'm going to save this for a week from, we meet on the 20th. I'll email this to people who are here. It's called Crossing Over, and it's what scholars of religion, of comparative religion, call leaving your tradition and entering another one, but not leaving your tradition behind. So when Jackie and I spent a day at an open house at a mosque that one of my students in her 40s helped arrange it and participated in worship. And we knew to take our shoes off. And we knew Jackie wore a big headscarf, and they had a table full of hijabs for women to borrow so that their hair was covered. We knew that we would be seated separately in worship. And I felt incredibly welcomed. And you can laugh at this example, but one of the hosts of the meeting, as we were breaking up from a brunch meal to go to the prayer hall, said, "I need everybody's attention," over a microphone. Everybody stopped talking. And he said, "Women, please exit by the door to your left." And he gestured. And then with his other hand, he said, "Men, go to the door." And he pointed right at me. He said, "That older gentleman who's rocking a bow tie." I had a bow tie on. I like them. Many of them are presents. So after all of the festivities were over, he came up to me and he said, "I am so sorry I singled you out." I said, "No, it's a nice compliment." And he said, "Where do you get those?" I said, "Well, I don't know. This one was a gift, and it was purple and black." And he had a purple shirt on. And I said, "Can I give this to you as a gift?" And he said, I can't accept that." And I said, "Well, but I really want you to, because I've been welcomed. I can get another tie." And he kind of smiled. So I untied the bow tie and rolled it up and gave it to him. And it's just a marvelous memory of being accepted. So I'll email you some information, and we'll begin by talking about crossing over. And then we'll dive into the earliest religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, on our next meeting on the 20th. Now, I know I went over a minute from what I said, but I'm happy to take any more questions now or comments.
One of my core beliefs, I'm sorry,
Go ahead, Lois.
one of my core beliefs is that God created humans with the desire to worship. And every human worships somehow, someone, something. And I can expand on that, but I think that's enough to add to your just as a jumping off place in your discussion that everyone worships.
I agree. And I'll email you something about this, Lois, and we can continue. That's a very good point. And it makes me wonder about the statistics because there are more unaffiliated people in the world, and that's the word that the Pew Foundation uses, than there are Hindus, okay? 16% of the world is unaffiliated. That doesn't mean they don't believe in something. They may not have a formal connection to what we would call a religious tradition, but they believe in a divinity and they believe that there's some sense of purpose in the world, and they believe in, however one wants to phrase it, being a good person, living an ethical life. But they're not affiliated. And I agree with you that God created them. They're not yet to worshiping with others, but they're doing something by themselves. Not all of them, but I believe a good majority. Any other questions or points? Yeah.
Yes, I have one, Larry.
Hi, Larry.
It sounds a little bit like this comparative religion class is leading towards all religions lead to God. Is that where it goes?
It's not how I've taught it, and it's not where I want this to go.
Okay.
They are separate and distinct. And many people through my life have said that's the real point of it all. I'm making a note to reference a Jesuit priest, Teilhard de Chardin, who is frequently studied in seminary, and he posited the idea of an omega point, at which time God's purposes will be fulfilled and all religions will cohere, not necessarily convert, but come to this omega point and fulfill God's intentions. That's fallen into disfavor. I hope that's the case. And I also, out of my own life experience, am interested in comparing religions and also recognizing the reality that if my father had gone to India in World War II, as many of his co-workers on the railroad did, and I hadn't been born yet and he was single, if he had married a Hindu woman, guess what I'd be? And I don't know how to, that's just a possibility. I don't have an answer to that question. But I know that I was very, very warmly received by all of the Buddhist colleagues I had teaching at a university with 12,000 students. It's partly cultural and it's partly religious. I invited them to church and they came, and they invited me to the Buddhist temple and I went. And we're still friends, but they didn't try to convert me, and I didn't feel a need to convert them, simply to open my heart to them. And I'll finish with this. They said to me, why do you work so hard in the evenings preparing handouts and extra things for all the teachers and being the expert on linguistics? I said, well, that's my job. And they said, but we don't work that hard. And I said, well, but you see, God called me to this job and God presented me this opportunity. So I don't regard it as hard work. I regard it as fulfilling a calling. And, you know, in language that we all use sometimes, I was witnessing. but I wasn't saying you have to come over here to my house. You can come to my house for dinner and you can come to church with me. And if somebody or something speaks to you, of course, I'm going to encourage you. And conversely, they didn't ask me to convert. And we'll talk about that when we get into the history of Christianity and how missiology, the study of doing mission, has changed in the mid 20th century.
Joy has a question.
Terry Joy is.
Oh, hi, Joy.
Yes, so a question I would be interested in hearing you address is the ways these religions think about women. And I guess your story about the bow tie particularly brought this up. But you said you felt very welcome, but that was just after this announcement that said women exit this door, men exit this door. And I'm curious if Jackie was there, how welcome Jackie felt in that setting.
If she's still on, she can answer.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness, very welcome. During the social time, I sat with a group of women, but they weren't segregated. It just happened that they were sitting together because they knew each other, but then some of the spouses or siblings joined us, and I felt very welcome. Everyone wanted us to gain an understanding of their traditions without preaching. It was just they so wanted to share what was sacred to them. And they were also recognizing that a removal of shoes, covering the head was not our tradition, and said, oh, no, you don't need to do that. And I obviously, as a guest in their place of worship, felt like, oh, no, yes, I do, out of respect, but very open. And the women I spoke with, I mean, their lives were very rich. Some were stay-at-home moms, some were professionals, some were straddling both worlds, and not any different than what we know. I think there's misinformation in terms of the way women are treated in Islam. I think that that's one of the barriers that we want to look at between us, that we want to break, because they're very, very much like us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I would be interested in hearing more about that.
Mm-hmm.
I made notes, Joy, and I will talk about that, both with particular experiences. Okay. But I'll tell.
Can I also add, I'm sorry, honey. I was baptized in the Assyrian Orthodox Church, and the very traditional church segregates men and women in seating. Many of the traditional or conservative Jewish temples still have that practice. So, I think that women in the Catholic Church can't have certain roles. So there's across all the religions, their treatment of women varies, and it's interesting to compare.
Okay, I'm very aware that it's 12:20, so I can wrap up, or we can stay for another question or two if that sounds okay. Okay, I'm going to wrap up very shortly with a story about Jackie and I on vacation. We had spent the better part of 2 weeks near the Atlantic Ocean in Cornwall and then in Exeter, so I could see 10th century tombs and Anglo-Saxon manuscripts. And then we went to London, and one of my students who graduated magna cum laude from Loyola just finished her master's degree at London University in international diplomacy, international relations and diplomacy. I was not a ghostwriter, but I helped her polish the language because English is her fourth language. She came to the US at age 12. And Jackie and I, having met her parents because they had us to dinner, as I had helped her through the rest of her bachelor's degree at Loyola, with writing mostly, and went to her graduation. We got off a subway stop to meet them for supper at a restaurant. And Durdana's mother came walking up in her ankle-length Uzbek dress, they're from Uzbekistan, with a hijab, and Durdana in a different dress. And her mother stuck out her hand for me to shake her hand. And I said, "You're not supposed to do that." And she literally grabbed my hand and pumped it. I had a little small, thin nylon shoulder bag with phone and suntan lotion. I don't know what all was in there, my wallet, on my shoulder. And she said, "Give me, I'll carry." And I said, "This is light, I can carry it." And again, she grabbed my arm, pulled the bag off, put it on her arm, and she would not let us buy supper. And it was just a carry-out halal restaurant. We ate at one table that was crooked on the sidewalk out in front, right next to parked cars. And that family would dispel so many stereotypes about Muslims in terms of, and they are very devout in their prayer life. They are very clearly not Christian, but they've acculturated to saying, well, yes, it says I'm not supposed to touch a man, but I know you, so just get over all of this stuff. And Jackie's smiling because every time that this happens, it brings light into a situation, and we can all laugh about it. So I'll leave you on that note. I want to give you my email address, because if anything else comes up, you can email me. I promise I'll respond within 24 hours. And it is simply my initials. First initial T, and then my last name. It's tmcint@gmail.com. So if you email me, I promise a response. And if it's anything that I think is on other minds, I'll shape the upcoming presentations for you.
Would you say that you said MCINT?
No, T at the first.
Yes.
tmcint@gmail.com.
Oh, okay. So you don't do the whole last name. Okay.
No, it ends at the T.
Thank you.
It's also posted on the website if you lose that piece of paper.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Julia.
Okay, I apologize for us staying a little longer, but I really appreciate your participation. And I'm going to shape accordingly, and I'll put some handouts. The two main ones are Britannica.com for each religious tradition, and then a website called Religious Tolerance. The latter one you can get lost in, and there are some real strong opinions occasionally at that website. Britannica is neutral and factual and accurate. So if you do that reading, it'll give you a framework, and then I will put in the next handout the methodology of the different 7 steps that we'll try to go through. But last thing, I want to go where you want to go, because I'll talk about this stuff all day long.
I'd like to suggest a tradition when everybody's muted, that the way of showing appreciation is glad hands.
Okay, I'll remember that for in 2 weeks, Chuck. Okay, I really appreciate your presence. This is a joy.
Stay safe. All right, thanks, Terry. And next week, we're going to be back to our Bible study with Larry and benedictions and doxologies. Hope to see you then. Have a good week.